The cup came down the line from the left, and Kalen watched it approach for a long time before it reached him. It was not what he had expected. He had spent the whole of his novitiate imagining something enormous and golden, a vessel out of the chapel frescoes, held up in two hands by a figure in white. What came along the firing step of the east gate that night was a plain thing of dark metal, about the size of a helm, dented on one side, and it was carried by an ordinary brother with soot on his gauntlets, who passed it to the next man and moved on without ceremony. Each man raised his vambrace and opened the vein at the inside of the wrist with the small blade that hung there for this and for nothing else, and let it run into the cup for a count of 5, and closed the wound with a press of the thumb, because their blood does that, and drank, and passed it on. Callan had been a blood angel for 190 days. He had killed on 2 worlds. He had not yet done this, because he had not yet been present for a night before a battle of the sort where it was done, and he had asked no one what it meant, because asking would have marked him. Brother Soren was 2 men to his left, and Callan watched him take the cup. Soren was old. Callan did not know how old, and it was not a thing you asked. There was a scar down the side of his jaw that had gone white, and a section of ceramite on his left pauldron that had been replaced so many times it no longer matched anything else he wore. He opened his wrist without looking at it. He held the cup a moment before he drank, and his lips moved, and Callan could not hear what he said. Then it came to Callan. He had rehearsed the movement 1,000 times against the day. He opened the vein and let it run, and it made a sound going in, a small bright sound against the metal, and he found that his hand was steady, and that the rest of him was not. The blood in the cup was not fresh. That was the first thing. Underneath the newness of what the last 6 men had put into it, there was something older and thicker and darker, and it clung to the sides where the metal had gone rough with age. And when Callan tilted the vessel, he understood that the cup was never emptied. It was topped up. Whatever was in the bottom of it had been in the bottom of it for a very long time. He drank. It went down like heat, not warmth. Heat, the way a coal is hot, and it did not stop at his throat. It kept going, and it spread out flat across his chest and pushed at the underside of his ribs from the inside. And for the length of about 4 heartbeats, Callan of the Blood Angels stood on a wall on a world he had not heard of a year ago, and felt the most complete thing he had ever felt in his life. He felt seen. That was all. There was no vision and no voice. Something very large and very far away turned its attention onto him for a moment, the way a man glances up when someone comes into a room, and then it went back to whatever it had been doing, and Callan was left holding a dented cup on a firing step with his eyes stinging. He passed it on. His hands were shaking. He looked down the line and saw that nobody was looking at him, and understood that this was a courtesy, and that all of them had done this once. "The first one is the worst," said Soren, without turning round, "or the best. I have never settled it." Callan did not trust his voice, so he did not use it. "Do you know what you just drank? Our blood, ours." Soren agreed. And his. The east gate of Vesa was 40 meters of adamantine set into a curtain wall that had been raised by men who were dead before the Imperium had a name for this sector, and behind it there were 9 million people, and in front of it there was a plain going black with the enemy. They had 6 days before those 2 facts had to be reconciled. Callan learned in his first hour on the wall that the enemy were world eaters, and he learned in his second that this was considered, among the older brothers, to be a particular kind of luck, not good and not bad. Particular. He did not understand that until later. The sanguinary priest came up the stair an hour before the 3rd watch, and Callan knew him by the white and by the reductor at his hip, and by the fact that the men on the steps stood a little differently when he passed. His name was Therese. He had a face that had been handsome in the way all of them were handsome, and something had happened to it, and he had let it stay that way. He stopped where Callan stood. "You are Callan." "Yes, Lord." "Do not call me that, Therese. I watched you take the cup." Callan said nothing. You wept, said Taris. Not much, enough. That is normal and it is not a fault. And I'm going to tell you why it happened, because in about 5 days you are going to need to know, and men who find out in the middle of it do not always come back. He sat down on an ammunition crate with the ease of someone who had sat on a great many of them, and he looked out over the parapet at the fires spreading across the plain. And he began, and Kalen stood there and listened, and afterwards he thought that his life had 2 halves and the seam ran through that hour. You know what we are, Taris said. You know the 9th Legion, the angel, Baal, the chapter. You have had all of it in order from the Schola and the chapel and the reclusium. Yes, yes, then you have had the clean version, now you get the other one. Sit down, you are making the sentries nervous. Callan sat. Before we were the Blood Angels, said Taris, we were the 9th Legion, and before we were called anything official, we were called the Eaters of the Dead. Kalen looked at him. You have not heard that. No, it is not on the frescoes. Taris turned the reductor over in his hands the way another man turns a coin. The 9th was raised on Terra like the rest in the last years of unification, and it was raised badly, and I want you to understand that we did not fail at recruitment, we chose. The other legions took the strongest specimens from the strongest stock, and we did not. Because our genie seed would take, that is the truth of our line, it will elevate material that would kill any other legion's aspirants on the first implantation. Deformity, degeneracy, mutation, the failed and the discarded. We could take them and the process would go through, and what came out the other end was beautiful. Beautiful, Kalen said. Every time, look at your own face in a plate sometime, look at the brothers on this wall. There is not an ugly man in this chapter, and there has never been one. And that is not a coincidence, it is the gene doing what the gene does. It takes whatever it is given, and it makes it fair on the outside. He set the reductor down. The deformity does not go anywhere. It goes inward. Everything our line was ever given that was wrong went inward, and it is still in there. And in 5 days you will meet it. Kalen said, the thirst. We will come to the thirst, first the eating. He said it flatly, the way you state a supply figure. The 9th fought its early campaigns strung out across Terra, and then across the near systems, always undermanned, always thrown at the worst ground because we were expendable in a way the favored legions were not, and we developed practices. That is the word the archive uses. Practices. We ate our own dead, said Taris. That is the first one. When a brother fell, and there was no time and no apothecary and no way to carry him, his brothers took what could be taken. Some of it was ritual, a swallow, a mouthful, a thing said over him. Some of it was not ritual at all. A space marine can fight for 4 days on nothing if he is fed properly once, and we found that we could feed on almost anything. And a legion that never has to wait for its supply column is a legion you can throw at anything. Callan found that he had stopped breathing and started again. And then we ate the enemy, Taris said. For the same reason, it was efficient, and then because we were what we were, it stopped being about efficiency. Yarant, he said, is the one they teach us not to teach you. Yarant III in the solar segment, earlier. A world that refused compliance and had the fortifications to mean it, Rogel Dorn commanded. He broke fortress after fortress the way he does, and it came down to the last citadel. And the last citadel was not going to fall to any assault that could be mounted in a reasonable time. And the 14th Company of the 9th had been busy through the whole campaign, and nobody had asked what at. They had been taking prisoners, civilians mostly off the ground they had already cleared. Nobody thought anything of it. Prisoners are taken. Taris looked at his hands. They brought them up to the foot of the citadel walls, in sight. They put up a void shield so that nothing from the ramparts could touch them, and they set stakes in the ground, and then in full view of the defenders in daylight, over a period of days, they ate them. Kalen said nothing at all. They did not hurry. That is the detail the record preserves. And I think the record preserves it because the man who wrote it could not stop thinking about it. They did not hurry, and they looked up while they did it. 2.5 meters of transhuman, in armor, in the middle of a siege. Taking his time and looking you in the eye, on the 7th day the garrison opened the citadel. Not because a wall came down, because there was no longer anybody inside willing to stand on it. He let that sit for a moment. There was a solar auxilia regiment attached to that campaign, the Malagant, and they filed a complaint afterwards about missing personnel, men going off watch and not arriving anywhere. They ran the numbers and found that they could account for about 5 in 100 as genuine desertion. Then somebody pulled the pict feeds from the perimeter, and there was footage of a man standing at a fence line smoking, and an arm coming out of the dark behind him, and a hand across the whole lower half of his face, and then no man at the fence line. They complained, said Taris, to a legion that outranked them about a legion the emperor needed, and the complaint went where complaints go, and nobody stopped it. Kalen said, somebody eventually did, but not for the reason you would like. Taris almost smiled. There was a cult that grew up around us in those years, on Terra, in the underlevels. They called themselves the Reborn. Priests who preached that the 9th were angels made of iron, and that to be taken by us was ascension. They collected the offerings, they took payment from families to have an aspirant put forward. They ran that operation for years, and they were, by every account, filth of an entirely ordinary kind, and the Legion knew about them and did nothing whatsoever, because they were producing recruits, and we needed recruits. What changed? The imperial truth was decreed. Religion became illegal. Taris shrugged. And the 9th went down into the underlevels and destroyed the cult of the Reborn in a single night, thoroughly, and filed the paperwork. Not because of what they had done, because worship was now against regulations. We would have let them run forever otherwise. The wind came over the parapet and brought the smell of the plain with it, which was fuel and rot, and something underneath that Kalen's new senses insisted on identifying, and which he had begun trying not to notice. Then Neptune, said Taris, the moons. The moons, there is an entry in the compliance ledger that runs to 4 lines, and it cost the 9th 12,000 legionaries. He said the number, and then let Kalen have it for a second. 12,000 under the surface of the moons of Neptune. There were tunnel systems, and something was in them. And the record does not say what. It says that the 9th engaged, and that the 9th prevailed, and that the moons were subsequently subjected to sustained radiological bombardment to ensure the extinction of the indigenous element. That is not a compliance, said Kalen. That is a burial. It is a burial, brother, and I'm glad you can hear it. We went into a hole with 12,000 men, and we did not come out with them. And then we cooked what was left in the hole from orbit for a long time to be certain. And to this day, nobody in this chapter can tell you what we were fighting. And afterwards, we replenished. From the surviving population, from the ones who had come up out of the tunnels and given themselves over. We took our aspirants out of them within the month. And inside a few years, we were back above our old strength. And that was when Malkador the Sigillite gave us our name. Taris picked up the reductor again. The Revenant Legion. That is what we were officially for most of the Great Crusade. He named us that, and he meant it as an observation rather than a compliment. A revenant is a thing that will not stay dead. Kill it, bury it, burn the ground, and in the morning it is standing at the edge of the field again. He was right, said Taris. He has been right about us 4 times since, and he has been dead for 10,000 years. Kalen said after a while, you are telling me we were monsters. I am telling you we were what we were, and that everything you love about this chapter was built on top of it and does not replace it. Taris stood. There was a world called Kiburan, where we spent 12 years fighting mutant hordes under a warlord whose name is not worth learning. And at the low point of it there were 380 of us left alive in that system, 380 out of a legion. And what did we do? Replenished. We took aspirants out of the mutant population we were exterminating, and we put them through implantation on the ships, and we sent them back down, and we fought that war with an army grown out of the enemy, and it worked. And the sorcerers on the other side finally worked out where their dead were going. And they broke and tried to run, and that is how we won. He looked down at Kalen. That is the legion the angel inherited. Not a proud brotherhood with a noble flaw, a pack of beautiful cannibals with excellent casualty tolerance. Sleep, brother. You are on the wall at fourth watch. Kalen did not sleep. He sat with his back against the inner face of the parapet and listened to the wall, and towards the end of the watch Soren came and sat down a meter away and did not say anything for a while, which Kalen was grateful for. He told you about your aunt, Soren said eventually. Yes. He tells everybody about your aunt. He is right too. Soren had a strip of oiled cloth and was working it along the edge of his chainsword, slowly, the way men do when the work is an excuse. He will not have told you the rest because Taris is a priest and priests keep to the flesh. The rest is mine. The rest? How it stopped. Soren held the blade up and sighted along it. Baal, he said, you know the shape of it? He came down in a capsule and the tribes found him and he grew. Everybody gets that much. Do you know what he found when he got there? A dying world. 3 of them, Baal and Baal Primus and Baal Secundus, and all 3 had been something else once. There had been a civilization on that system that was not human, long before us, and something ended it, and nobody knows what. And the ruins are still out there in the deep waste with our monasteries built on top of them. He landed on Baal itself, which nobody remembers, because Baal is the one you cannot live on. Gravity, like a hand on your chest. He walked out of the capsule into that and breathed the air, which was poison, and found it pleasant. Soren went back to the blade. The tribe that took him in called themselves the Blood. That was the whole of their name. They were not savages in the way the scholar likes to draw them. They had metalwork, and they had law. What they did not have was food, and above them in the mountains, where the radiation was low enough to be worth having, there were mutant clans who had taken the only good ground and who came down to hunt. Hunt what? Us people, that is what the Blood were, brother. They were the meat. They lived at the bottom of a world where the good land belonged to things that ate them, and they had lived that way so long they had stopped considering it an injustice, and they ate their own dead to get through the dry seasons, and they were not ashamed of it because there was nothing else. Kalen sat with that. So when the 9th Legion and the man off Baal finally met, said Soren, there was no adjustment. Nobody had to be taught anything. He came to a legion that ate its dead from a people that ate their dead, and that is the part I want you to hold on to. Because everyone talks about the angels civilizing us, and almost nobody notices that he was not appalled. He understood us before he arrived. He had been us. He grew fast, the way they all did. 2 years, 3, and he was a giant and he had wings. Soren stopped working the blade. The wings are the strangest thing in our whole history, and nobody talks about it. He knew they were not his. He said so, later, more than once. He would look at them the way you look at a piece of kit that came in the wrong crate. How could they not be his? Because he did not leave the laboratory with them. Soren set the cloth down. When the 20 of them were scattered, his capsule was damaged. It took a long time coming through the warp, and it was open to it, and on the way he passed through something. You know that Baal had a Xenos civilization before us. What is not in the standard catechism is that they left something behind, 2 somethings. The old records the chapter keeps under the reclusium call them the 2 angels, and I want to be careful how I say this, because it is easy to make it stupid. They were not gods, and they were not daemons. They were entities that the old inhabitants of that system had made or found or become, and there were 2 of them. And they were opposites. One was everything cruel that a thinking creature is capable of. One was everything decent, and they were not enemies in the sense of good against evil. They were the two halves of the same argument, and they had been having it for longer than our species has been standing upright. And neither could finish it, and his capsule went through them, and he was in it, and something was exchanged. Soren's voice had gone quieter. They gave him wings, he gave them his blood. And from that moment they were no longer free things having an argument in the dark. They were bound into his bloodline. They belong to us now, brother, both of them. Kalen felt the hair rise on his forearms inside the armor. The bright one you have seen painted 100 times, and you did not know what you were looking at. When a blood angel's force is in the worst place it has ever been, and the line is going, sometimes something comes down out of nothing wearing gold and a face that is almost his, and it does not speak. And afterwards it is not there. We call it the sanguinor. Nobody agrees what it is. Some of the reclusium hold it is the first master of the sanguinary god. Some hold it is the last shard of a man called Meros, and we will get to Meros. It does not matter. It is the bright one, and it is ours, and it comes. And the other, Soren looked at him. The other one wants a body, he said. It has always wanted a body. It got one once in a brother whose name you will hear if you live long enough. And that is a different story and not one for the night before a battle. He went back to the blade. And before you build a saint out of him, Soren said, you should have two names, an actor and a Drantis. I have not heard either. No. An actor was a system that had come through the age of strife intact, and it had come through intact by raiding its neighbors, who were also human. They refused compliance. He went in with 12 companies. They had soldiers called the Iron Bulls, augmetic work of a standard nobody has matched since, 8-limbed, carrying plasma throwers and grav lances, and they would engage Astartes and sometimes win, and they would not surrender. There is a line in the account about a shore of an acid sea where the fighting went on for 80 kilometers, and for 80 kilometers the ground was covered with them, because not one of them ever ran. He admired them, said Soren. He said so. He stood on that shore and grieved for the enemy, because they had honor, and he could see it. Then their government asked for terms. They asked him to withdraw to orbit and receive their envoys, and he did it gladly because he did not want any more of it. And the envoy ships came up out of the dark and closed on his fleet and detonated their own reactors. How many? 180 of his sons in the decompression alone. Soren's hand had stopped moving, and Sanguinius the angel, the most beloved of the 20, the merciful one, took that system apart, not the fleet. The system, ground assault, world by world, settlement by settlement, done by hand so that nothing would be missed. And when it was finished, he seeded the poles with phosphex and burned the atmosphere off the planet, so that if anything had been missed it would not matter. And Adrantis, he said, is worse because Adrantis was patient. A cluster that did not refuse compliance, they agreed. They just never quite got to it. They received delegations and requested time to deliberate. They held votes that were inconclusive and requested time to hold more. They asked for the terms to be restated and asked for 4 years to consider the restatement. For how long? 103 years. Soren looked at him, and the Imperium finally understood that it was being handled, and that the cluster had been trading with the Xenos, raiding its neighbors the entire time, and it sent the angel with instructions to make an example that other systems would hear about. 78 billion people, brother. That is the figure in the ledger. He made a speech first. He always made a speech. He told them that their deaths would weigh on his soul, and he meant it. He wept saying it, and then he killed all of them anyway, because he had been ordered to, and because he had decided they had chosen dishonor over refusal. So he had wings, and he came to the emperor with them, and what made the angel into what he was had nothing to do with the wings at all. It was 10 seconds on a rock on Baal. The emperor came down to collect him, custodians, remembrances, the whole apparatus, and Sanguinius went out to meet him and knelt without being asked, which almost none of them did. Russ fought, Angron had to be taken. The lion made him wait. Sanguinius saw his father and went down on his knees and wept. And he was the first. And the emperor, said Soren, walked around him in a circle, slowly, talking to him, listening to his account, being what passes with him for kind. And as he circled, he reached out more than once and touched the wings. He was checking them. He was checking them, Soren said. Sanguinius hated to be touched there. It is in the record. He wanted to pull away from his own father's hand, and he did not dare. And he stood there while the master of mankind ran a hand over a part of him that had not come from the design and quietly established that it was not his work. And then the emperor said that it was interesting and that it would not affect anything, and moved on. Kalen said, "That is all. That is all. That is the entire event." Soren's mouth moved, and every one of his brothers who ever wrote about him said the same thing afterwards. Magnus said it, others said it, that Sanguinius fought like a man with something to prove, and that they could not work out to whom. He was the most beloved of them, every account agrees. He was the only one the others all liked, and he could not shake the idea that he had come out of the crate wrong. He knew he was not to specification. His father had checked in front of witnesses and moved on. The horizon had begun to gray. Down on the plain, something enormous had started its engine, and the sound arrived across the flat ground a long time after the flash. "So when he came to us," said Soren, "he came to a legion of monsters, carrying a private certainty that he was defective. And you know what he did with that? No. He decided we were his, not a project." His Soren stood and slung the chainsword. Horus offered to take the ninth off him. What? At Pentarus, before the compliance, Horus Lupercal, who loved him, sat him down and said, "Brother, your legion is broken. They are cannibals and killers, and they will shame you. Put them under the knife, and I will lend you my own sons until you can raise a new one." That offer was made. It is on record. And he refused. He said, "They are mine." Soren looked out at the fires, and then he did the thing that saved us and the thing that damned us, which as it turns out were the same thing. And Taris can tell you the mechanism because it is his trade. Ask him. Ask him about the cup. The first assault came at the 7th hour, and it was not what Kalen had trained for, because nothing was. The World Eaters did not maneuver. There was armor with them, and there were guns, and none of it mattered, because what came at the east gate came in a line 400 meters wide at a dead run, and did not slow when it reached the killing ground, and did not slow when the wall guns opened, and did not slow when the first rank of it ceased to exist. Kalen fired into that until the barrel of his bolter was hot enough to see, and reloaded, and fired, and somewhere in the third magazine he realized that he had stopped aiming and started choosing. There was a thing coming up the rubble slope below him in red plate with a chain axe, and Kalen could have shot it 4 times before it reached the parapet, and he did not. He watched it come. He was interested in it. He wanted to see it closer, and there was a taste at the back of his mouth like metal warming, and his heart had gone into a rhythm he did not recognize, and the whole of the world had narrowed down to one climbing shape and how it would feel when it arrived. It came over the parapet, and Kalen took it apart with his hands. He did not remember drawing the combat blade. He remembered the sound the gorget made when it went, and he remembered the smell, and he remembered that the smell was good, that it was the best thing he had ever smelled in his life, and that some part of him that had been asleep for 190 days sat up inside his chest and said at last. He came back to himself on his knees with his gauntlets red to the elbow, and Soren's hand closed on the back of his neck like a clamp. "Breathe," Soren said, "in, out. Look at me." "Not at that, at me." Kalen looked at him. "Say your name." "Kalen," again. "Kalen, brother Kalen, 3rd Company." "Good." The hand did not let go. Now say what you are not. Cullen stared at him. Say it. You do not know the words. I will give you the words. I am not the angel. I am not the angel, said Cullen. Again, until you believe it. Cullen said it 4 times, and on the 4th time the plane came back, and the noise came back, and he became aware that he had been howling for some period of time, and that the brothers to either side had made room for him without breaking their firing, which was a thing they had evidently done before. Soren let go. That was the thirst, he said. That was a small one. Get up. The assault broke at the 11th hour, and did not break so much as run out, and the ground in front of the east gate was covered to a depth that made the word ground optional. Taris found him in the shadow of the gatehouse afterwards, sitting with his back to the stone, holding his own hands and looking at them. You did well, said Taris. I do not want to talk about it. No, that is why we are going to. The priest sat down across from him with a case open on his knees. Give me your arm. Kalen gave him his arm. Taris put a needle into the vein and drew off a measure into a vial and held it up to the lumen and looked at it. And Kalen watched him do it. You want to know what happened to you, said Taris. I want to know if it happens again. It happens again. It happens for the rest of your life, and it gets worse. And I'm going to tell you the whole of it now, while you are frightened enough to listen properly. He held the vial up. There is a fault in our Ginny seed. Every chapter of the Adeptus Astartes has one. The wolves have their own. The Iron Hands have theirs. Ours is the oldest and the most complete, and it does not skip anybody. It is called the Flaw, and it has 2 faces. The first face is what you did on the wall. We call it the red thirst. It presents as a compulsion toward blood, and it intensifies under combat stress. And if you want the clinical description, it is a partial failure of the mechanisms that keep an Astartes aggression under conscious control. You will feel it in your mouth first, metal and heat, and a great deal of interest in something that ought to disgust you, and then you will want it. And the wanting will be the strongest and cleanest thing you have ever felt. And that is the part nobody warns you about. It is not unpleasant, brother. That is the trap. It is the most alive you will ever be, Kalen said, and the second face. We will come to the second face, said Taris, because it is on this wall with us, and I expect to be dealing with it before the week is out first. The mechanism, because you asked the right question, and Soren sent you to me. He capped the vial. Everything I am about to say is why there are so few of us. You have noticed that 900 and something battle brothers, where a codex chapter has 1,000, and always struggling to make even that. It is not attrition, it is that we cannot take just anybody. Our line is unstable, and it is unstable in a way that has been getting slowly worse for 10,000 years, and every implantation is a risk we take on purpose. And you have noticed that sanguinary priests do more than field surgery. We hold the blood. Every one of us carries a portion of the chapter's stock. When a brother falls, we take his progenoids and we take his blood, and both go back into the reservoir, and both come out again into the next generation. Nothing is wasted. There is a straight physical line running from your veins tonight back through every brother who has ever served, without a break, to Baal, to the first cohort, to the cup. To the cup, said Kalen. To the cup. Now I will tell you what is in it. Taris put the case aside. The 9th Legion had a right before a major action. From the earliest Terran days, from the cannibal years, each man opened a vein into a common vessel, and each man drank from it. It was a practical thing before it was a holy thing. It said, we are one body, and if I fall, you may use me. That is all it was. At Pentarus, the first compliance he led as our Primarch, the Legion assembled, and the cup went out and came back, and Sanguinius took it, and he did not add his measure. He filled it. The whole thing. He opened himself and filled a vessel that 10,000 men were going to drink from, and he handed it back, and he said, drink, my sons. Kalen said nothing. And it worked, said Taris. That is the part I need you to sit with, brother, because it is not a horror story. It worked. Within a year the Legion had changed. The eating stopped. Not by decree, it simply stopped mattering to men who had never questioned it. And what came up in its place was the strangest thing in the history of the Astartes. They started making things: sculpture, music, verse. Every brother took up a discipline and worked at it, and they did not display it, and they did not compete over it. There is an account of a captain who had lost both arms at the elbow, working stone with augmetics and a fine chisel. And men who had known his earlier pieces said quietly among themselves that the old ones had been better, and none of them said it to him. That is the 9th Legion after Pentarus. A cannibal legion that became a legion of artists and did it in under a decade, and did it because of a swallow of blood. He worked stone himself, said Taris. That is not decoration either. Wherever the fleet made a long anchorage, he would raise a hall, and it would be part chapel and part gallery, and half of what stood in it was his own. He did not display it as a Primarch displays a trophy. He put it up and let men walk through and did not sign it. And those halls were guarded, and by whom is worth knowing, because you will not have heard of them. The Crimson Paladins. Kaelan shook his head. Nobody has. They were an order inside the Legion, and their entry requirement was that you already had to be one of the best men in it. Not aspirants, not a company, veterans only, and when you were taken into them you surrendered every honor you had earned before, every campaign badge, every mark, all of it stripped, and you were given cataphracti plate and a place, Terminator armor, as a uniform for a standing bodyguard. Do you understand what that meant then and what it would mean now? And there is no record of a Crimson Paladin retreating. Not one in the entire span of the Great Crusade. They did not have a doctrine of no retreat. They simply never did it. And after 200 years somebody noticed and wrote it down. And the rest of the time, said Taris, they stood in his galleries, motionless in that armor for days, so that men walking through to look at the sculpture would take them for statues and then realize halfway down the hall that the statues had been watching them the whole while. Everyone assumes it was inspiration. It was not inspiration. Taris tapped the vial. It was biology, and it was sorcery, and he did not know he was doing either. A Primarch's blood is not blood. A Primarch's soul is not the size of ours. When Sanguinius filled that cup, he put a fragment of himself into every man who drank, and it took root, and it bred true. And it has been passed down every line of Genesede for 10,000 years, and it is in the sample I have just taken out of your arm. You are carrying a piece of him, brother. That is not poetry. That is the finding, Cullen said very carefully. Then what happened at the end of the heresy? Taris looked at him with something like approval. You are quick. Yes, that is exactly the question. When he died, said Taris, he did not die quietly and he did not die far away. He died on the vengeful spirit in the worst manner that has ever been devised for a son of the Emperor, in front of an enemy who took his time, and every fragment of him in every one of his sons was connected to the original. It went through the warp like a wave, and it went into all of them at once. Every blood angel alive felt their father murdered in detail, from the inside as though it were happening to them, because in the only sense that matters it was. And it did not stop when he died. It is still going. It is in the Genesede, and the Genesede is in you. And every generation is born already carrying the memory of a murder that happened 10,000 years ago to somebody else. He picked up the case. That is the second face of the flaw. We call it the Black Rage. And the difference between the thirst and the rage is the difference between wanting something and being someone. The second assault came on the third day, and it was worse. And on the fourth day the outer redoubt fell, and they gave it up and pulled back to the gate itself. And on the fifth day Soren stopped being Soren. Callan was 11 paces from him when it happened, and he saw the whole of it, and he has never been able to describe the first part properly, because there was nothing to see. Soren was firing, Then Soren was not firing. He was standing upright on a firing step with rounds coming past him, and he had lowered his weapon, and he was looking out over the plain at something that was not there. "Brother," said Kalen. Soren said, "They have come back to the gate." His voice was wrong. It was not louder or wilder. It was the voice of a man saying something obvious to someone slow. "Soren, tell the guard to close on me. The gate cannot be lost. He is coming himself. Do you understand? He is coming to the gate and I have to be there." Chaplain San came along the step at a run, and he did not shout. And afterwards Kalen understood that this was training and that everything about the way the chaplain moved was designed for exactly this. "Brother Soren," said San. Soren turned and Kalen saw his face. There was nothing insane in it. That was the horror. It was calm and terribly focused and entirely certain. And the eyes had gone the color they go. And the man looking out of them was not looking at a wall on Kolar. He was somewhere else, and it was 10,000 years ago, and he was in charge. "Where is my brother?" Soren said.
"Where is Ferrus? I was told he was dead." "He is dead, Lord," said San. "Then it has begun." And Soren of the Blood Angels went over the parapet into the enemy, and he was not fighting world eaters, and this is what he was fighting 9 months.
That is what it comes to, and nobody understands it, because the number sounds like an administrative figure. 9 months on the wall, not 9 months of campaign, 9 months of assault without a full night, without a full meal, without any period longer than an hour when there was not something coming. I have not slept. I have stopped being able to tell where the fatigue ends, and I begin. The palace burns from the outside in. The sky over Terra has been on fire since the 2nd month. There is no blue anywhere. There has not been for so long that men have stopped remarking on it. The dust is a hand deep in the courtyards. Everything smells of promethium and hot rock and the particular sweetness that a battlefield gets after the 4th week. And they keep coming, and there is no end to them, and I go where the line is thinnest because that is what I am for. And every time I arrive, the men there stand up again, and I have learned to hate how well that works. They should not need me to stand up. They should not be able to. I have been fighting my brother's sons for 9 months. Do you know what that is? Not the traitors, not the daemons, the sons of Horus. Boys I watched him raise. I trained with the lunar wolves for 3 years, and I loved them. I loved every one of them. And now I break their necks at the Eternity Gate, and I know the pattern of their armor, and I know how they were taught to move because I was taught alongside them. And then Kabanha comes back. I have met this thing before, on Cygnus, where my brother sent me to die. That is what Cygnus was. I did not understand it then, and I understand it perfectly now. Horus sent the 9th Legion to the far end of the Ultimus Augmentum on a compliance that did not exist, into a system that had already been given over to the ruinous powers because he wanted us dead before the war started, and he wanted it to look like misfortune. We came into Cygnus, and the daemon called Kiris put a wave of the warp through the fleet, and it killed the navigators. Most of them at once in their chairs. It killed the astropaths. It took away our sight and our voice in one motion, and it left 70,000 of my sons in the dark at the end of the galaxy, with no way to call for help and no way to leave. And I took them down anyway, because there were 9 planets of living people under that thing, and they were mine to protect. Kabanda met me at the cathedral, a greater demon of the blood god, and I fought it and I beat it. I want that recorded. I put my blade through it, and it went backward every time we closed, and it was losing, and it stopped fighting. That is the thing I have never been able to explain to anyone. It stopped mid-exchange, and it looked at me, and it said that it would not fight me, and it turned around and it went into my sons. 500 in under a minute. It killed 500 of my sons in front of me, and it was not even a battle, it was an errand. And every one of those deaths went through me because every one of them had my blood in him. 500 at once. It put me on the floor. Me. It broke my legs with a whip and put me down, and I lay on the stones of that cathedral and felt 500 pieces of myself go out. And while I was down, my legion fell into the rage for the first time. That is where it started. Cygnus is where the chapter's curse first showed its face, and it showed it because of what I felt, and what I felt went into them because of the cup. I gave them the cup to make them better. It made them into a lens for my own worst hour. Meros saved us, an apothecary. Not a captain, not a champion, an apothecary of the line. And when the blood god's right was about to take the whole legion, he flew into it and offered himself, and it went into him instead, all of it. Every drop of that rage found a single vessel, and he held it, and it killed him, and it did not kill him, and what he became is still with my sons and will be with them long after I am gone. He was 31 years in the legion. I had spoken to him twice. So when Kabanta comes over the eternity gate on Terra, I do not have to think about it. It goes for my sons again, of course it does. It has learned the lesson well. It knows what hurts me, and it is not interested in a duel. It is among the retreating wounded, and it has taken 40 of them before I reach it. I do not use the blade. I take one arm and I take the other, and it screams, and I put a hand under its jaw and I twist until the neck goes, and it comes apart into smoke and gets sent back to wherever those things wait, and I stand in the wreck of it, and I'm so tired that I cannot see properly. And Angron lands behind me, my brother who never had a chance, who was taken off a slave world with wire already in his skull, who had the butcher's nails driven into him in some arena pit before he was old enough to fight in it, and who has never had one clear thought since. He is a demon now. Korn has him entirely, and he comes at me in fire. And I fight him, and I am running out. That is the truth of the eternity gate. I am 9 months without sleep, and I have just torn apart a greater demon, and behind me my sons are still trying to get through a doorway that has to be shut, and if I take the long form of this fight, they die in it. So I take him by the head. He is stronger than me. He has always been stronger than me. But he is not faster, and he never was. And I get behind the swing, and I take his skull in both hands, and I hold it the way you hold a beast you are about to put down, and I feel the nails. That is the thing nobody knows. I put my fingers into my brother's head to kill him, and what I found in there was the machine, and I could feel it working. It was still running. 10,000 years, and it was still doing to him what it had done on the first day, over and over, second by second, and no part of what Angron had become had ever once been given a moment's quiet. He begged me. I want that written down, and I know it never will be. He begged. He knew what I was going to do, and he knew I could do it. And he asked me not to, and there was one instant in the middle of that where the voice coming out of him was not the demon and was not the nails. It was a man asking me to stop. I pulled them out anyway. They came out with what was left of him attached. There was almost nothing. 10,000 years of that machine, and my brother's brain was a small dark thing the size of a pea, wet in my hand, and I looked at it, and I understood that I had not killed anybody, that there had been nobody in there to kill for a very long time, and that I had just performed a mercy on a corpse that had been walking since New Syria. I put my sons through the gate. I shut it. That was the work, and I did it. And then my father sent me on to the vengeful spirit, and Ferris was waiting for me on the stair. Ferris Manius, who died at Istvan, whose head my brother took off, standing on a stone stair inside a ship that is halfway into the warp. And I ask him how, and he tells me that the walls are thin now, that Horus is becoming something the gods have not attempted before, and that if I listen, I will hear the others. I listen. I hear my brothers screaming, not the traitors, the dead ones and the taken ones both. The halves of them the ruinous powers keep, and they are all in there, and they have been in there the whole time, and they are still going. And Ferris tells me the only useful thing anybody tells me in the entire war. He says, do not try to save him. He says, you will want to. You will hold back the killing blow because you will want him to repent. He cannot repent. There is not enough of him left to repent with. Take the head the first moment you can, and do not wait. I said I understood. I did not understand. I heard him, and I agreed with him, and then I went up the stair, and I saw my brother, and Horus turned around, and for 1 second, there was something of him in the face, and I began to hope. That is my failure, not weakness, not fear. Hope I had him. 3 times I had him. 3 times I could have finished it, and 3 times I pulled the stroke so that the wound would be terrible and not final. Because I wanted him to stop, I wanted him to say it, I wanted my brother back, and I could not make myself accept that my brother had not been in that room for years. And while I was hesitating, our father took off the limits. I felt it happen. Everything went thin, all at once, everywhere. And the power that had been keeping the palace standing stopped being spread out and started being spent, and the gods went hungry, and Horus went hungry with them. And then it came back. It came back into him, all of it, at the worst possible instant. And the wounds I had spent an hour opening in him closed while I watched. He is smiling at me now. He is not in a hurry. That is the last thing. He breaks the bones one at a time, and he takes his time about it. And he tells me what he is going to do to my sons after, in detail, and he is right about all of it. And at the end he takes my soul out, and he throws it to them, and they tear at it, and something holds. Something in me holds and does not come apart, and I do not know what it is. And then he puts what is left of me up on the wall on their sign, the 8-pointed one, with my arms out. And this is where every one of my sons wakes up, and it is where I have woken up every day for 10,000 years, and I am so tired. The gate. Get to the gate. Where is my guard? The gate cannot be lost. They pulled Soren down 400 meters out with grapnel lines, and it took 11 of them to do it, and 2 of the 11 were dead before he was on the ground. He had gone through the world eaters like weather. Callan watched him do it from the parapet with a sick understanding growing in him. Soren was not better than those things. He was fighting them at the Eternity Gate on Terra 10,000 years ago, holding a doorway for men who were dust before the chapter existed. And the world eaters were the sons of Angron, and in every way that mattered to the man inside that armor the fight was correct. That is what nobody tells you about the Black Rage, Callan thought. It is not madness, it is a filing error. He is in the right battle. He is in the wrong century. Chaplain San went out to him with the black armor carried behind him in a case. Will he know us? Callan asked afterwards. No, said Taris. He was working, and he did not stop working while he answered. He will know the angel. He will know the gate. He will know that there is a line that has to be held and that he is the one holding it. He will not know his own name, and he will not know yours, and he will never come back. There is nothing. There is one thing. We give him a target. Taris tied off a suture. That is the whole function of the Death Company, and you will hear it described as an honor, and it is also the plainest piece of logistics in this chapter. We take the brothers who have gone into the rage, and we put them in black armor, marked with the red cross, so that everyone knows what they are. And a chaplain leads them, because a chaplain can reach a man in that state for about the length of a charge, and we point them at the heaviest thing on the field. And they die, every one, every time. Nobody has ever come out of the Death Company. Taris paused. That is not strictly true, and I will tell you the exception, because you have earned it, and because you should know it exists before you see one. There is a fate worse than the black armor. Very rarely, a brother goes into the rage and does not die, and does not stay a space marine. His body starts to follow his mind. He begins to change toward what he thinks he is. Toward the angel, Callan said. Toward... Never all the way, never anything but wrong. Bones that grow the wrong direction. Something that is almost wings. Hands that are not hands. We have kept perhaps 6 of them in the whole history of the chapter. We keep them in the deep vaults under the fortress monastery in stasis, and we do not speak of them. And there is one circumstance in which we let them out, which is the end. said Taris. At the devastation of Baal, when the Hive fleet was in the monastery, and there was no next day to preserve anything for, Lord Dante gave the order, and they were released. And they ran ahead of the last line, and they tore apart things the size of buildings, and every one of them died in the doing. And most of them died of their own bodies rather than of the enemy, because they were never built to last an hour. Hearts, seizures. One of them simply came apart. He looked up. Do not ever ask to see them. They held the east gate for 2 more days, and on the 8th night the relief force made the outer approaches, and the World Eaters, who had never once in 8 days done anything that could be called a maneuver, dissolved into the dark and went to fight it instead. Kaelan stood on the parapet with his bolter hanging and watched the plain empty out and did not feel anything he could name. "You are looking for Soren?" said Taris. "No, you are. It is normal." The priest came and stood beside him. "He is out there and he is still going. The death company goes forward until the last one stops. And when the relief force comes up in the morning, they will find them at the far end of everything, and none of them will be alive, and the ground around them will be a mess that people will make speeches about." He was talking to me an hour before it happened, about the wings. He liked the wings. Taris put his forearms on the parapet. "Ask me the question you are actually holding." Kaelan said, "Why do we still drink it? There it is. If the cup is what did it, if that is the thing in the Genie seed that makes us relive his murder, if that is why Soren is out there dying in the wrong century, then the answer is obvious. Stop drinking, stop the rite, break the reservoir. You are a priest, you hold the blood, you could end it in a generation." "Yes," said Taris, "I could. Then why?" The priest was quiet for long enough that Kaelan thought he had given offense. 2 answers. Taris said at last, "One is practical, and one is not. And the practical one is not the true one. The practical one is that it is already done. The fragment is in the Genie seed, not in the cup. Stopping the rite changes nothing, except that we would go into battle without it. We would still have the thirst. We would still have the rage. We would simply be a chapter of men carrying a dead god's memory who had also decided to stop acknowledging him. That is worse in every way I can measure." And the other answer, Taris took his time. "Lord Dante is 1600 years old," he said. "You know that? What you may not know is what he did with roughly 1,000 of them. He beat it, brother, the thirst. Nobody else in the history of this chapter has done it, and he did it. And the method was exactly what you just proposed. He stopped. He denied it entirely. For centuries, by nothing but will, and it worked. Then it can be done. It can be done, and I have seen what it costs." Taris turned to face him. It hollowed him out. That is not a metaphor. His body began to fail because he was refusing it what it is built to have, and he aged, which we do not do. And by the end of that first millennium, the Lord Commander of the Blood Angels was a withered old man in golden armor who could no longer be looked at without the chapter losing heart. And that is why he wears the death mask. The mask is his father's face. You knew that. Do you know why he put it on? "To honor him to hide," said Taris. "Because his own face had become a thing that frightened his sons, and the only face he had that was not frightening was a copy of a corpse." Kaelan said nothing. And at the devastation, when the Hive fleet was in the monastery and the walls were gone, and there was one battle left, his own equerry came to him and knelt and opened his own throat and offered him the cup, not to save himself, to put his lord back into the shape that could still fight. And Dante, who had beaten the thirst for 1,000 years, took it, because there was nothing else. Because there was nothing else, and because he had understood something about 1,000 years of abstention that he did not put into words. Taris looked out at the plain. "The thirst is not a parasite in us, brother. It is not something that got in. It is him. It is the piece of him he gave us, running under pressure, and when you refuse it, you are refusing the only part of your father that is still in the room. Dante spent 1,000 years starving, and what it made him was clean and old and alone. and it did not save one single son of Sanguinius. Then there is no answer, Callan said. There is no answer. There is a choice, and every blood angel makes it privately, and none of us discuss it, and you have just made yours by asking the question out loud, which is more than most manage in their first year. He straightened up. Come, there is one more thing, and then you can sleep. They did the count at dawn. 209 had come to Kola. 144 were on their feet. Taris went through the fallen with the reductor and took the progenoids, and took the blood, and Callan was told off to carry the case, and so he stood there and watched it done 22 times, and understood at last why the priest had brought him. That is the reservoir, said Taris, closing the last vial. That is where it goes. Every man we lost this week is in that case, and inside a year, some part of every one of them will be walking around inside a brother who has not been made yet. He handed the case to Callan to carry, which Callan understood to be deliberate. We are not a chapter, brother. Not in the way the Ultramarines are a chapter. We are one body that has been dying and being replaced continuously for 10,000 years without ever once going out. And Malkador saw that in the 1st century and gave us the right name, and then somebody decided it sounded ill-omened, and we changed it. The Revenant Legion, kill it, bury it, burn the ground. In the morning it is standing at the edge of the field. They walked the length of the gate road with the case between them, and Callan asked the thing he had been carrying since the priest first spoke of Dante. How does a man last 1600 years? By being wrong about himself for most of them, Taris did not slow down. He was born on Baal Secundus, in the salt wastes, which are the flats where an ocean used to be, and he was small. The radiation had held him back. He was not a promising specimen, and the recruiters would have passed him over on the road. His father forbade it. That is the part I like. 2 of his sons had already gone to the trial, and neither had come back. And the old man told him plainly that he was the last one, and that he intended to keep him, and that there would be nobody to bring him water at the end if he went. And he went anyway. 3 times, said Taris. He crossed the wastes on foot, 3 times before a curator would even put his name forward. And then he went to the trial, which we call the Fall of the Angel, and which is a mountain, and which is exactly what the name suggests it is. And he came off it alive. A chaplain named Malphalax took him, watched him for 300 years, made him a sergeant early, and a captain of the 5th earlier than anyone thought sound. And then there was a rising on a world called Callius that killed every captain in the chapter, except one, and killed the chapter master. And the surviving priests and chaplains met to elect. They offered it to Malphalax. He was the obvious man, and everybody in that room wanted him, and he said no. He said that if they trusted his judgment enough to make him master, they could trust his judgment about who the master should be, and he named a 300-year-old captain of the 5th. Callan said, "Did they argue?" Bitterly. 300 years is a novice in this chapter. Our line runs long, and men are not given commands at 300. Taris shifted the case. They took the recommendation because they had no captains left and no time. And I am fairly certain that every man in that room privately expected Lord Dante to make one bad decision and die inside the century, which would settle the matter without anyone having to be discourteous about it. That was 1200 years ago. That was 1200 years ago. And he has fought more apocalyptic campaigns than any living commander in the Imperium, and he has come out of the great majority of them without the chapter dropping below viable strength, which nobody else has managed even once. Taris looked sideways at him. There is a word for what happens when a man does that for long enough. He stops being an officer and becomes a piece of the furniture of the galaxy. When Dante speaks, sector commands rearrange themselves around it. Not because of his rank, there are men of higher rank, because he is Dante. They reached the muster yard and Terry stopped. And there's a thing about him that is not in any of the catechisms, and that I am telling you because you carried the case without asking why. He dreams. Callan waited. The same one. For centuries, he has told it to perhaps 4 people, and one of them wrote it down. Taris set the case on a crate. He is on Terra, in the throne room. Not the palace as it is now, the room itself. And the golden throne is burning, and Abaddon has come all the way up through it, and there is nothing left between the War Master of Chaos and the Master of Mankind except Dante. And he goes in, 1600 years old, in his father's face, and he goes in and he fights Abaddon in front of the throne, and he buys some seconds, and then Abaddon puts a blade through him. The short stroke, the one you use on a man who is already finished. And he falls, and he lies there with the cold coming into his chest, and he watches Abaddon raise the sword over what is on that throne. And the throne comes apart in gold. Taris was quiet a moment, and a hand comes out of it, bone and gold and moving, reaching up to catch the blade. "He is not there to win," said Kalen slowly. "He has never been there to win. In 1600 years of that dream, he has never once beaten Abaddon, and he has never once expected to. He is there to hold a doorway long enough for something behind him to stand up." Taris picked the case back up. "Which is what we are for, brother. All of us. It is the only thing this chapter has ever done. Somebody holds the gate while somebody else gets through it, and the man holding it does not usually get to see what came of it." "Soren held one this week," Kalen said. "Soren held one this week." The cup came round again on the last night before the withdrawal, because there is a form for that as well. Kalen watched it come down the line from the left. It was the same cup, dented on one side, carried by a brother with soot on his gauntlets. There were 22 fewer hands for it to pass through. He thought about what was in the bottom of it, which was 10,000 years of this, and a fragment of a murdered demigod, and the reason Soren had walked off a wall into the wrong century, and the reason Kalen had knelt on a firing step with his gauntlets red and felt more alive than he had ever been. He thought about the fact that they had been cannibals, and that the cure had been to drink something worse. He thought about an old man in a golden mask who had held out for 1,000 years and had put it down in one afternoon because there was nothing else left to fight with. Then it reached him, and Brother Kalen of the Blood Angels opened the vein in his wrist and let it run for a count of 5 and drank and passed it on. It was the same as the first time. It was exactly the same. Something enormous and very far away turned its attention onto him, and held it there a moment and went back to whatever it had been doing. And this time Kalen knew what it was, and what it cost, and what it would eventually do to him. And he was glad of it. That was the part he did not say aloud, then or ever. Standing on a ruined wall, on a world he would never see again, holding a wound closed with his thumb, with his father's blood going down into him and the fires of the plain still burning, Kalen was glad. He passed the cup to the brother on his right, who took it without a word, and opened his own wrist and drank.